Hello everybody, my name is Mary Ann and today we'll be talking about self-checkout sanitation process improvement. This presentation is brought to you by Sierra, Edward, Jana, and myself, Mary Ann. So as we know, COVID-19 has changed how grocery stores process flow of traffic and sanitation. Our driving question here is, are employees at self-checkout using the best process for sanitation at local grocery stores? So with that driving question, it leads us to really, collect data, the information from 4 different businesses to really see if employees at self-checkout are really using the best process for sanitation in local grocery stores. So the stores that we went ahead to take a look at is Costco, Fred Meyer, QFC, and Walmart to really see what their sanitation process was. So our process improvement questions are, this is what we're basing this observation on is, are grocery stores sanitizing checkout areas? Do grocery stores have sanitizing supplies, for example, hand sanitizers, disinfectant spray bottles, wipes, etc.? How many customers in self-checkout during the 30-minute observations? How many customers wipe down the checkout stations with the supplies that are provided for them? Are employees wiping down stations after each customers, or are the customers even doing it themselves? So we'll really focus in on these process improvement questions to see if the sanitation process is really happening. So the very first business that we checked out was Costco. Spent 30 minutes observing. As soon as you walk into Costco, there's a big social distancing sign, so you can't miss it, reminding you to social distance due to the CDC guidelines. Also, you're required to wear a mask. Not everyone had on a mask. At the very front, there was a lady who was there giving out masks to make sure that you covered the nose and the mouth area. There are also stickers on the ground reminding you to please social distance. There were 4 self-checkout machines. When upon arrival, there was no sign of someone wiping it down before we approached to check out that stand. There were no customers in line at this time. There was a shield for the ID checker. So if you had something that was 21 and up to purchase, you would have to go up, let the store clerk know that you were purchasing this item, and they would walk up. There were no cleaning supplies, hand sanitizers at self-checkout, only at regular checkout. So this was what we observed at Costco. Now handing it over to Jana to tell us what she observed at Fred Meyer.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Hi, my name is Jana, and I spent time at Fred Meyer observing their self-checkout stations. I counted 16 self-checkout stations, 8 of which appeared to be newly installed, and as seen in the picture on this slide. There were 8 stations that were equipped with a plexiglass barrier, and the other older 8 stations were not equipped at all with these barriers. There were no sanitation supplies at the checkout stations, and the cashier had 1 bottle of sanitizer, which was completely full. During the 30-minute observation, it was a late weekday evening, and I didn't witness any wipe downs between any of the 55 customers that I counted. Granted, this was an incredibly busy time of day. I spoke to the cashier and asked about the requirements for wiping down the stations, and he stated that they were supposed to wipe down the stations every hour, but did admit that this was not happening during busy times. Out of curiosity, I did return again to Fred Meyer during a slow work week morning, and there were only about 10 customers that I had counted during my 30-minute observation. Again, there were no wipe downs during this time, and the staff were standing around chatting. Next is Edward to talk about his visit to QFC.
Thank you, Jaina. Hello, my name is Edward, and I collect data from Quality Food Center, also known as QFC. During the 30-minute observation, there were 16 customers who utilized the 6 self-checkout stands. It was observed that there were no barriers between the stations to promote social distancing. Hand sanitizer for consumers was not observed either, but a spray bottle and a rag were observed for the employee to utilize for disinfection of the stations. Throughout the observation, the employee designated to monitor the self-checkout department did not sanitize a single machine. There were plenty of opportunities for a quick wipe down of the utilized stations as it was not busy. The employee was not wearing a mask nor gloves. Upon inquiry, the employee did admit that wipe downs were supposed to happen at least one per hour, but more often if possible. Employee also did admit that even hourly disinfections do not always happen as they often get too busy. Next, Sierra will talk about her experience at Walmart.
Thank you, Edward. Hi, my name is Sierra, and I gathered data from Walmart. Upon my arrival at Walmart, I discovered little to no enforcement on customers wearing masks. At the self-checkout stations, I found cones and tape with signs securing the area away from customers, declaring that it was closed until further notice. Since I could not study the flow of customers through the self-checkout stations, I decided to peek at the cashier lines. Stickers on the floor initiated 6-foot distances between customers, but some did not follow these stickers or did not see them altogether. Another thing I noticed was that some cashiers would sanitize the card machine between customers or every few customers, while others would not do any kind of sanitation. Very few customers wore gloves, and only about half of the customers wore a mask. The system seemed to flow okay altogether, but not as sanitary and did not follow the CDC recommendations. Operation strategy. Operation strategy can be defined as the decisions made that shape the operations of a business and the contribution the strategy altogether. It is essentially a tool used to define the method to produce goods or services to a customer. The operation strategy that QFC, Walmart, Fred Meyer, and Costco were aiming was to reduce the risk of exposure and infection of COVID-19, while still making it possible for customers to get in and out of the store fast and comfortable. Fred Meyer and QFC showed similar operation strategies as they both initiated 6-foot CDC recommendations in cleaning station by employees. They lacked in the station cleaning, therefore leaving the strategy short of successful and putting customers at risk for exposure to COVID-19 through the self-checkout stations. Costco showed slightly more promising of a strategy. Costco's strategy was to enforce the mask rule of customers as well as the 6-foot apart CDC recommendation. Workers were initiated to clean self-checkout stations between customers, but did not do a great job at this. Lastly, Walmart's strategy was to avoid self-checkout for customers altogether. Blocking the stations created for more lines with the normal cashiers, but enforcing the 6-foot rule kind of kept customers away from each other. Some customers chose not to go and abide by the 6-foot rule. Cashiers were given the responsibility to sanitize the card station between customers, and some cashiers did, while others lacked at this task. We believe the companies could improve their strategies by implementing better training for workers to ensure cleanliness and sanitization. They could also help by enforcing the mask rule as Costco had done. Lastly, incorporating sanitization stations and products available for customers to use would be beneficial as well. Kaizen. Kaizen is defined by McLaughlin as a continuous improvement based on the beliefs that everything can be improved and that incremental changes result in an enhanced system. Kaizen also assumes that improvement can occur even with small incremental changes, creating subtle change results over time in return for an improved system. By incorporating a rapid improvement workshop for employees, companies will be able to implement the needs changed quickly but successfully. Small increments of change, but at a rapid rate, will help quickly change the system for the better. Holding an employee team meeting or workshop should be something that is done to initiate these changes with employees. Kaizen can be achieved through 5 basic steps. Step 1 is specify the value. To provide value to the customer, the identified activities should be sanitized stations and enforcing the CDC recommendations. Recommendations include the 6 foot between customers and masks to be worn at all times. Step 2, map and improve the value stream. The store should evaluate the current problems and what needs are to be improved. Once these areas are addressed, then the store should identify the desired future state, all while eliminating the unnecessary steps and considering them wasteful to the store. Step 3, facilitate flow. Outline the process of improvement using the identified problematic areas, creating frequent and successful steps that employees should take to sanitize, enforce, and improve the system for the customers. Step 4, allow for pull. Now that the team understands the areas that need improvement and how to improve these areas, they should take it into action. Allow for the flow of customers, and employees should try their best to keep stations clean while keeping the customers' needs and masks enforced. Step 5, enable perfection. As steps are rapidly initiated into the workplace, some problems may arise or not entirely be resolved. The 5-step process should be repeated until employees are meeting CDC recommendations as well as progressing towards the desired future state of the system. Next, Jana will take over.
Thank you, Sierra. We chose to use DMAIC as a way to implement change in our project. Our team chose this project as it is in need of the customer's employees to ensure safety and also requires improvement. Stores are to comply with the 6-foot sanitation rules. However, they are not complying with CDC recommendations as far as sanitation at the self-check stations. According to the King County Health Department, in addition to applying the social distancing recommendations in any lines that form in and outside of the store with tape on the floor, they are to provide alcohol-based sanitizers to employees and customers in convenient locations and use frequently. They are also to sanitize commonly touched surfaces and objects such as electronics, doorknobs, faucet handles, countertops, cash machines, keypads, and shopping cart handles frequently throughout the day, and appoint a designated sanitation worker at all times. These requirements and more are set by the CDC and were identified as critical to quality characteristics by our team. Measure. Our team members each took a popular chain store to visit and monitored the self-checkout stations for at least a half an hour to determine if these CDC recommendations were followed. Data was collected at these 4 stores. Only one store, Walmart, took the proper precautions and closed down self-check stations completely. According to the other stores, requirements were set in place according to the cashiers, but were admittedly not followed. Input is clean stations, output, sanitation, and process is critical to quality. Analyze. During our monitoring and data collection, we observed that despite cashiers seemed somewhat aware of the CDC guidelines, they were not being followed. We did not see proper sanitation at any of the stores. Plexiglass barriers were an excellent addition, but the stations were not being wiped down between each customer, or even every hour as stated by cashiers that was instructed. Improve. Our suggestions to improve are not only to educate the staff in a team meeting, but also to hire additional staff dedicated to sanitizing the stations and make these supplies readily available to staff and also to customers. Control. Once these improvements are put into place, they should be monitored to be sure that the CDC recommendations are followed and the self-checkout stations are properly sanitized, and verify that the process does not revert to the old ways. Now we'll have Mary Ann discuss process mapping.
Thank you, Sierra, for the introduction. So we'll now focus on process mapping. As we know, a process map or flowchart is a graphic depiction of a process showing inputs, outputs, and steps in the process. Depending on the purpose of the map, it can be high level or detailed. Process mapping is one of the 7 basic tools, an integral part of improvement initiatives for a business. Our illustration here shows a high-level process flowchart For business following the CDC guidelines, when a customer arrives at the self-checkout, a clerk should make sure that they're social distancing. As we can see in the diagram we have, there are a whole bunch of people ready to check out. If there's a line, putting them in a waiting area, which they're maintaining the 6 feet CDC guidelines. When a customer arrives at the self-checkout, a clerk should make sure that they're social distancing. If there's a line, as I brought out earlier, go ahead and waiting. Then the clerk should wipe down the self-checkout register before the customer uses the machine. This process will repeat until the store closes. As we can see in the flow chart, the clerk wiping down the self-register, the customer checking out. After they've checked out, then they're proceeding to the door. Businesses should follow these 6 steps for process mapping. Assemble and train store clerks. Determine the boundaries of the process and level of detail desires. Brainstorm the major process tasks and subtasks. In this case, who would ensure that the customers are social distancing? Who would wipe down the checkout stations? Create a formal chart, such as the picture that we see here. And the clerk should also be initialing their name and the time of which each checkout was wiped down. Reevaluate and make corrections. Determine any need for additional information. The purpose of the process map is to make sure that this new protocol is in place for social distancing and to follow the CDC guidelines.
Thank you, Marianne. During the temporary shutdown of many businesses, retail stores were and are still deemed essential. As these businesses do their best in providing the service that the general public needs, they also need to make sure that their employees are informed regarding the importance of maintaining a healthy working and shopping environment, and that facilities are taking necessary measures to promote social distancing and disinfection. Employees of self-checkout stations need to be able to protect themselves and the consumer from exposure. Our group believes that each employee should go through a mandatory COVID-19 transmission training. In this training, an emphasis will be made that grocery stores are considered medium exposure risk level facilities. This means that personal protection should be utilized throughout the whole shift, and disinfection of the checkout counter should be done between each customer at checkout. The employees need to be provided with masks to protect from inhaling airborne pathogens and gloves to prevent touching contaminated surfaces with their bare hands. Employees should also be provided with disinfectant supplies such as wipes and sprays with rags that will be utilized to wipe down check stands after each customer use. The check stand department should have a dedicated employee that will solely focus on disinfecting the check stand after each shopper. As the consumer arrives at the check stand, the area should be already disinfected for use. An automatic sanitizing gel should be placed where a consumer may reach it easily and utilize it before the checkout process. The consumer scans groceries and bags them with clean hands, utilizes the checkout process, preferably with means that require only minimal interactions with the equipment. Such methods such as Apple Pay or Samsung Pay, where the payment process is done with a mobile device. When the consumer leaves the check stand, the employee cleans and disinfects the area that was utilized with a thorough but brisk procedure. The disinfecting employee will also direct consumers to clean stations to make sure that a potentially contaminated station does not get used before disinfecting. In conclusion, after our observations and analysis for grocery stores to reach the goal of decreasing the chances of COVID-19 spread in the checkout stands, we recommend. To improve process flow, our team recommends that stores need to appoint a dedicated employee to sanitize each check stand between consumers and direct flow of customers to clean stations. Employees should wear a mask and gloves to protect cross-contamination. Also, facilities should provide disinfecting gels at each stand for customers to use before they operate the check stand. Facilities should make an effort to provide 6 feet of distance or install barriers to maximize protection of each customer at each check stand. As we saw, Fred Meyer has installed mobile plexiglass barriers between each check stand as a means to provide protection for each consumer. Some grocery stores are utilizing every other checkout machine, thus providing distancing, but at a cost of less check stands, which may add up to customers waiting in line. To decrease the amount of interactions a customer is required for payment, we recommend stores to add services such as Apple and Samsung Pay capability to their point of service machines. With such technology, the consumer can completely omit touching the payment touchpad, thus decreasing the chances of contamination. Team Dishing It Out would like to thank you for watching our presentation. Goodbye.